Hi there. Thank you so much. Glad to have you with us once again here on Leading Edge. I'm your host, Jeff Smith. Coming up in a few moments, a study into just how far every dollar spent on the Boys and Girls Clubs of Ohio will go. We'll focus specifically on Toledo, but the numbers are pretty amazing. But first, for 30 years, the city of Sylvania has known one name when it comes to leadership. And earlier this month, an announcement of the changing of the guard.
One of the luckiest people on earth to have served in Sylvania. It has been the honor and privilege of my life to serve 10 years on Sylvania City Council and 29 years as Sylvania's mayor.
I've known him for a long time, and I'm so glad to have Sylvania Mayor, at least for a few more weeks, Craig Stough,
joining us. I'm honored to be here.
Good to have you. Thanks for coming in. We appreciate it. I said it the night we ran that clip earlier this month, and I said I could hear the emotion. In fact, I stopped for the audience, and I said, you can hear the emotion in his voice.
Well,
so take me through that moment.
Well, it was a tough decision. It's hard to know when to retire and to step aside from what's been a really productive and happy part of your life, and to move on to new possibilities. And it was time to move on. After 29 years in the mayor's chair, it was time for a new generation to come in.
Did you ever think it'd go as long as it did?
Oh, no, absolutely not. In fact, I thought about retiring 7 years ago, but the water deal was only partly done at the time. And I just decided I'd stay on for another 4 years after that because I wanted to get that deal done.
Yeah.
And then 3 years ago, there was competition. I decided I wasn't going to step aside because there was competition.
Right, and Katie ran a good campaign, and obviously it was a tough go, and you said you wanted to stick it out. I think I guess the elephant in the room, the question that a lot of people wanted to know was you still had a year left. What was the decision in that, and why?
Well, we've been planning it for a year to have a smooth transition. It is very stressful when somebody's been in office for that long to move on, because everybody in the city of Sylvania, by charter, works directly for the mayor's office. And I had signed the employment letters for everybody that works for the city now. And I just felt it'll be much smoother for those people. There'll be less worry if we can have a smooth transition to the next generation, which is Mark Frye. He's going to do a wonderful job for us. And
current council president.
That's correct. So I think this is the way to do it.
And just to take people back through history, you said you went through the same thing, the same kind of play out when you took over in '96.
I was president of council, and Mayor Jim Sini had to resign because he was going to work in Columbus for Mayor Voinovich, and we were thrust right into it. But I had 2 years until I had to face election. We're giving Mr. Frye part of a year before he has to do that. And I think that's a fair thing to do.
Have you received some well wishes from people you didn't expect to hear from?
I am overwhelmed by the good wishes that have come into me from different places. People that are remembering things that are a long time ago. And I just couldn't be happier with all the nice things that are happening for me. We had a wonderful editorial in the Blade. I even made Mommy Dearest with a baseball analogy. I don't know if you saw that, but they compared me to Cal Ripken Jr. What an honor that is.
To keep going and getting those at-bats. You mentioned Mommy. It kind of tees it up for me as far as this next. Toledo Blade came out with an article last weekend. I'm sure you saw it. Colonial charm, polluted politics, Mommy's tumultuous year. The reason I ask this is because you have hung your hat on the water deal and the Regional Water Commission. And I've got to read from this article and just get your take. To the frustration of city officials and citizens alike, the identity of the people who took those actions to dump raw sewage into the Maumee River have never been revealed, nor have the identities of the people who issued the order to dump the sewage, so on and so forth. It is now clear the people responsible for dumping sewage did more than pollute the river. They also polluted the relationship between Maumee residents and their city's leadership. This is Toledo Blade. My question for you, as you see this parting shot opportunity, was this ever a tumultuous moment for the commission? Was there banging on the table to get the answers?
For the Water Commission?
Yes.
No. In fact, Mayor Rich Carr worked side by side with me to negotiate the deal. I was not aware of any pollution problems from their sanitary sewer system. Rich was in the same position as Sylvania with their water contract, and we worked together along with other mayors from around the area to come up with the best deal we could. Their water problem, I'm not sure Rich knew about it. That's such an old problem, but somebody that worked for him let him down. There's just no doubt about it.
Yeah, but
And it's expensive to pick
no
up.
names, and you know of nobody sitting on names?
No, I've known the last 3 or 4 mayors of Maumee, and it's never come out that they were worried about something like that. We talk about our communities. What are the challenges facing us? And that wasn't one of them. They weren't aware of it. I've gone by where that outlet is in Maumee. My wife and I ride our bikes by that.
Yeah.
They have an outlet for the part of the city, the old part of the city, that just overflows into the Maumee River.
Right.
Most of the city, the new part, goes out to the Lucas County treatment plant.
But you would admit it's been an ugly moment for this town.
It sure has.
Your final moments here. We got 30 seconds, Mayor. Sylvania, going forward, what are your hopes? What do you think can be possible?
Sylvania's in a great position right now. We're financially good. We've got wonderful employees that are talented and dedicated, and we have 2 big projects coming along. Our downtown is going to be rebuilt with a new streetscape starting next spring. We've already bid it. It's in on budget, and it's going to take 2 years to build the first block and then the second block. That's all funded. And then we have a new interchange going on at Monroe Street and US 23. That's a $33 million project that's going to make it a lot safer and a lot more efficient. Both of those projects are funded with grant money, and I look forward to the successful completion of those.
And that's been talked about for years, and
Sure has.
I'm sure you're asking residents, whether you're in office or not, to be patient.
The bridge is going to be closed in 2026, not 2025.
All right. So more things to look forward for.
Thank you.
Mayor, thank you so much. We appreciate
My
it. And good
pleasure.
luck to you in your retirement.
Thank you so much.
We'll be back right after this. Welcome back. Whitney Houston, the singer that we all loved and adored. She may have said it best when she sang, "I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way." That's the effort of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Ohio and Toledo, for that matter, and a newer study revealing how the investment in the organization grows. CEO and president of the Boys and Girls Club of Toledo joining us, Jim Ravas. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Let's dive into this study a little bit. And I know you weren't surprised by the numbers, but just to see it on paper, and I'm going to read from this, every dollar invested in the Boys and Girls Club will generate $35.16 in lifetime benefits for members.
Correct. Yeah.
How does that go forward, I guess?
Well, the beauty of it is that the Boys and Girls Clubs, when we came together, it was looking at how can we create first success for the children, but then number 2, when you're looking at the kids and where they're at with their parents either compromising being at home, giving up that job, whatever that may be, we give them relief, and that enables them to be good, productive people and adults, parents, earning more money, spending more dollars in the community, but then also helping their kids get a better education, become better citizens, and then they get good jobs.
Are you guys a good barometer, you think? Have you noticed over the years of where the economy is, how it is getting better, if at all?
Well, I don't know if on the economy as a whole, but
maybe just generosity of the public?
I'd say that the clubs seem to be somewhat immune to inflation or to a recession, because there's always that need, and the community has always come together to say, how can we support that need? So you mentioned that number, that $35.16, that's in lifetime benefits to Ohio and communities. But the other notable number is for every $1 invested, $12.25 of economic and social impact annually for all Ohio communities. And when you mentioned that, these aren't numbers.
This was an Ohio University study, by the way. I want to point that out.
I was just going to share that. This isn't something that the Boys and Girls Clubs of Toledo or America came up with. Ohio University and the Voinovich School came back and did this study, and they looked at all this data for several years. The previous one was 10 years ago at U of M. So this data is independently calculated, and it's irrefutable.
It's staggering. The other things we want to talk about specifically going into a new year, and obviously post-pandemic, we have talked about the mental health, well-being, the social aspects of our young people, and how much of a focus that is for the clubs.
Yeah, it's still a focal point for us. Coming out of the pandemic, kids were falling behind academically. we're now seeing more of a social component with that. How do they engage and interact with one another? Conflict resolution. When they were in the middle of the pandemic, they're seeing things on an Xbox. Okay, well, let's go fight with one another. But now it's a question of how do we work collaboratively with one another?
One, you've expanded your footprint, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we are now in 9 clubs around Northwest Ohio and inside Lucas County specifically. Our latest club is at Hiawatha Elementary School in Washington Local Schools.
Yeah.
And we are growing, and the number of kids that are coming to the clubs, we're well over 4,000. Our average daily attendance is approaching 600 kids a day.
Wow.
It's the impact is being felt across 2 major school districts and throughout Toledo.
30 seconds, what's your outlook for 2025 as far as the clubs are concerned?
This year is going to be settling into having 9 clubs and looking at what the possibility of the future is going to hold. We're not going anywhere. We know there's more need, and anytime we can collaborate and get some help from the community, we'd appreciate it.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you.
Merry Christmas.
Tim.
Happy New Year to you, too.
Always good to see you. We appreciate the work. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back. Thanks for being here. As always, a couple of weeks ago, outgoing Greater Toledo Community Foundation President Keith Burwell, he was at an event, stopped by our studio, and he told me, you have to get this next guy on your show because he's knowledgeable, he's entertaining, no pressure, and engaging, and his specialty is in the spirits. The distilled spirits, that is. Say hello to whiskey ambassador Elliot McFarland. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is awesome. Now, he and I were chumming it up in the green room, chatting it up in the green room, trying to get to know what we were going to talk about here, because I don't want to seem foolish. I don't want to seem stupid, because this is an acquired art. And you told me you've gone to school. Not only literally, but figuratively, as far as whiskey and bourbon is concerned.
It's great. You can go to whiskey school. You got to go to Scotland, but you can go to whiskey school.
Which you did.
Yeah.
And what is that process like?
Well, you learn how to make the product.
Yeah.
You show up day one and they hand you a shovel and you start moving grain, and you learn from there up.
Talk to me a little.
Whiskey.
Talk to me a little bit about this, I guess, affinity. Did it find you? You find it?
I think it found me. I was doing a lot of volunteer work in Scotland, and you're over there, you tend to drink local whiskeys and you learn a lot about them, and I get home and people ask me, and one thing led to another. Next thing I know, I'm talking about it in public, and people are like, wow, whiskey. I'm like, yeah, it's a good thing.
Now, you think foreign country, the pressure's on. Did you have to know your stuff early on? That was something you assimilated in being in country and came to know?
You have to know what you're talking about. If
Yeah.
you go to somebody's country like Scotland, who's most famous in the world for their whiskey, you can't bluff your way through it. So yeah, you do have to learn a lot about the process and the different types and wonderful whiskeys that are available.
I talked a little bit about the documentary Neat that over the course of the last few years has really grabbed an audience. And do you find, is it naive to say that bourbon has become more popular over the last decade? Or
No, it has, definitely.
why is that?
I think it caught on in the United States because they expanded production and so many new bourbons became available. I think people wanted a product that we could call our own. Bourbon is uniquely American. You can only really make it in the U.S. and call it bourbon. And
I'm going to stop you there. Why?
it's protected. You know, federal law.
Okay.
Bourbon. The name bourbon is a whiskey that's predominantly corn based, and you can make it anywhere. You could make bourbon in that whiskey in some other country. You just can't call it bourbon.
Interesting.
So the name is protected in the United States, and the rules are very strict about how bourbon is made and what's in it. And real tough.
It's a debate as old as time. What is the difference between whiskey and bourbon?
Well, all bourbon is whiskey.
Okay.
But there are other varieties of whiskey, like Scottish whiskey and Irish whiskey and Canadian and rye and Japanese, right? There's lots of different kinds of whiskey. Bourbon is one of the kinds.
Here's what I find interesting. You and I were talking about you will be called in or you will be called upon locally, across states, to come in and sit down, talk people through their bourbon knowledge or lack thereof, and you will also go to dinners where, like a wine dinner, you're pairing bourbon with dishes, with appetizers, I don't know, with desserts, things of that
usually
nature?
5 courses, including
How
dessert.
does that work? How is it different than what people know as you're putting a Merlot with this beef or things of that nature?
You need to know a lot about the whiskeys so that you can think about how to pair them with food. There's a lot of difference. Some of them are very sweet, some of them are very earthy, some of them have a lot of grain flavor and oak. And there are certain things you can't really serve. There's not much, but there are some things that just don't go with whiskeys. Kind of like a red wine dinner, there's certain dishes that aren't served with a dinner like that.
They tell
So
you
have
white
to learn
wine,
about
eat that with fish,
Right.
red wine, eat it with beef. I mean, is bourbon the same?
Bourbon goes with most things. Scottish whiskey, Irish whiskey, there's just certain spicy food, a lot of vinegar, goat cheese, things that affect your palate. You can't really have those at any kind of tasting, not just whiskey. Wine dinners are the same.
I wanted to tell you, in fact, we were talking in the green room. I said, what's your palate? How has it changed over the years? What do you like tasting in bourbon? What are some of the flavors that make a good bourbon in your estimation? Because like you said, not everybody's going to agree with you.
No,
right?
they don't. And there's always at least 2 or 3 people in the room that know more than I do. The thing about bourbon is that being a unique product, and it's made very similarly all over the United States, although the vast majority of it comes out of Kentucky and Tennessee, you can make it anywhere in the U.S. Any state can make bourbon. So bourbons are all very similar because the recipe that's involved and the way that it's aged in oak barrels, that makes it unique. And you can pick out any kind of bourbon. You can get the 5 or 10 best bourbons in America, and if you nose them, if you smell them, if you really took the time to think about what you're smelling, they're all going to smell very similar. And most of that comes from the barrels that are used.
What are the hints of things that you think?
Vanilla.
Okay.
Vanilla's a big one. And some people call
As a good note?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And some people call it butterscotch or caramel, but it's a vanilla smell. And that's unique to bourbon, and it comes through very strongly. And so if you're not a fan of butterscotch, vanilla, one of those, you're probably not going to drink a lot of bourbon.
But here's a stupid question. Is vanilla bean or vanilla hints put into the barrel?
No.
Then how does it come about?
It's a reaction of corn alcohol with new oak barrels. It's a chemical reaction.
No kidding.
It creates a flavor and a nose, a smell. And that includes this vanilla butterscotch kind of smell.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of tannins, a lot of oil and moisture still in the oak that the barrels are made out of. And the grain, the alcohol made out of the corn grain interacts with those things that are in the oak. And that chemical reaction creates smell and a lot of the flavor that you get in a bourbon and why people like bourbon.
Is there a whiskey trail in Scotland similar to what we know and have heard of
Well, the
in
original
Kentucky?
whiskey trails in Scotland. Yes, there is. Extensive. You know, there's a lot more distilleries in Scotland than there are in Kentucky and Tennessee. There's 130 or 40, depending on, you know, who's opened recently.
And we're
in
talking
Scotland.
modern facilities, or we're talking
Oh, no,
old
they
school?
vary. Some of these
Yeah?
go clear back into the 1700s.
Yeah.
Old school.
And still exist.
Still exists, still cranking out some wonderful whiskey. And Ireland's the same way. There's several old ones in Ireland. Bushmills, for instance. These
Yeah,
guys
talk
have
about what you brought out
This is
here.
Bushmills is Irish. These guys have been around since 1608. They're very proud about that. They put it right on the bottle.
Now, are
So-
all of these available in Northwest Ohio and
yes,
Southeast Michigan?
Yes, this is Irish. This is a Balvenie. This is a Scottish whiskey. And this is Stranahan's. Good local connection, same family. They were instrumental in getting a distillery going in the Denver area at least 20 years ago. And they make an American single malt. It's the same as these are all single malt whiskeys, which means there's just barley in these. There's no other grain. And so 3 nice ones from the U.S., from Ireland, and from Scotland.
What makes them nice? I mean, I
like
have
them.
It can't be as easy as that.
Well, that helps. You know, I'm a whiskey ambassador for the United Kingdom, so I specialize in Scottish whiskeys. But over the years, I've learned to like other whiskeys. You're drawn to it.
Is it too simpleton to say it's smooth?
No, many of them are smooth, and that's why people like them. Bourbon is generally considered smooth, sweeter than Scottish whiskey, and a little smoother. It doesn't have a bite to it that you can get in some Scottish whiskey.
You didn't pull out of your sample case a Pappy Van Winkle, which has, through the years, everybody talks about it. It's an expensive bottle. I'm interested. Is that a good whiskey?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is. And if you could get it for the price that's listed at the state store, you should buy it. Unfortunately, whenever bottles show up, there's a long line of people waiting for it, and the first thing most of them do is go home and advertise it on the internet somewhere and sell it for 5 times what they paid.
We've got about a minute left. I know you have dinners coming up, and you said these happen all over the place, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be at Chow, a wonderful restaurant here in Toledo. I've been there for a decade. I'm going to be there next month, September. You have to check their website, Facebook for it. Just did a couple of nice things at the Sylvania Country Club recently. I've got events coming up. I'm going to be in Montana in a couple of weeks doing some wonderful whiskey tastings in the area where I grew up, where my grandfather lived. Nice.
Elliot, you are fascinating and you are a pleasure, and I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It was good to meet you. Stay right there. We'll wrap things up for this week right after this. Welcome back. We taped that segment with Elliot back in August. I loved it so much, had to bring it back. By the way, next week's show, a year in review of Leading Edge. Over 130 guests throughout the course of the year. We're going to whittle that down for you just a little bit. We hope you'll join us then. I'm Jeff Smith. Have a great rest of your week. Happy holidays to you and yours. We'll see you next time on Leading Edge.